So the laziness lie is just my term for a set of kind of unspoken cultural beliefs about productivity that are very much in the water that we swim in as social beings. And the way I frame it, the laziness lie has three main tenets that most of us on some level believe. And the first is that a person's worth is tied to their productivity or determined by their productivity. The second is that because of that, any needs or limitations you have that get in the way of your productivity are a threat. And so you should really ignore those things and minimize them as much as possible so you can get on with being productive. And then the last one is that there's always more that you could be doing. So even if you are somehow really high achieving at work or getting some of those social accolades that are really prized and rewarded, you can still feel guilty about not, working out enough, for not, having high achieving children, for having a messy house, for whatever it is. There's just an endless, like, impossible litany of things a person is expected to do and be in society, and nobody can actually live up to it. Yeah, so the laziness lie and just these attitudes towards productivity have been really infused into um, the systems that interface with disabled people and their needs from the very beginning. Ever since we've really had any kind of social welfare system for disabled people, one of the main like reasons for existence for those institutions have been to weed out fakers that are taking advantage of the system. There's this very puritanical idea, and it does date back to the Puritans who really believed that giving someone charity was morally corrupting them because then they no longer had an incentive to work. They really viewed, charity as evil. And, beginning in the early 20th century when, disability services started being something that some governments started doling out, it was always incredibly rigorous to apply for, and certainly still is, constantly having to reapply for benefits, and having to worry about being ratted out by your neighbors or just members of the public who have seen you, walking around when you have a tag on your car, and they assume that means you can't walk at all, and so you must be a faker. And as an educator, we also see it in the educational system too, with professors just refusing to give disabled people extra test time, thinking that, oh, they're just spoiled rich kids who got a diagnosis so that they can do better in school. And nobody actually needs these things, nobody actually needs trigger warnings. That's just a huge part of the rhetoric, and it's something that disabled people have to live with constantly, proving that they are doing everything that they possibly can, that they're suffering enough to deserve compassion, which doesn't really make sense. Any amount of suffering should be worthy of that. And just constantly having to prove to people that they actually are what they say they are. And that often bleeds into them also doubting themselves. I think especially in activist organizations, change organizations, there there's still the spirit sometimes that the problem that organization or that group is trying to fight, that's so much more important than any individual person's need. And how dare we be, too weak and jeopardize the movement in some way? Like, certainly I feel those kinds of self-doubts and anxieties at times, even myself. Yes. Uh, this is one of my favorite niche topics to talk about. So EPrime, or English prime, is this kind of academically created dialect of the English language that avoids all use of the verbs to be. So you could never say, for example, that man is a thief. You would have to say that man, you'd have to be more specific about what you were actually talking about. You'd have to say that man stole a loaf of bread from the store, or that man stole a car from, somebody's mansion. You can't really, with E prime, commit what's called the Aristotelian fallacy, which involves just equating what somebody has done with who they are. You can't say someone is disabled. You can't say someone is crazy. You can't say someone is dangerous because you don't have that verb. So instead, you have to be a lot more precise about the situation and the circumstances that you should probably be describing instead of making that generalization. I tend to
Very
use
cool.
it to highlight the
So how did
cause
you come to
of an
practice it?
injustice that
I
people
was on the
often
debate
use language to
team
kind
in
of
high
obscure the
school,
origins of.
and my debate
So
partner
when
and
people
I
say something
both got
like, you
very
know, so and so
into
is the first
philosophy and
transgender
cognitive
author to
neuroscience
ever, you know,
and
have a book
found
on this
out about
list, on
and
this,
also
you know,
just writing
selected
because
list,
we
or
had
this
to write
person
all of these debate
is the
briefs,
first, you
and
know,
stumbled
female
upon some
head
writing about
of
EPrime from the 90s, and then we
her
picked up
academic
this
department or
book,
something like
To Be
that.
or Not, an
That
EPrime
locates
primer
the experience
um,
inside that
that
individual
that just
person, that like
explained,
they have the
the
quality
reason for
of
that
I am
dialect
the
and how it
first
kind of
trans author to be on
just
this list. I
forces you to
am the
flex
first
your
woman
mental
to be in
muscles a
this
little bit
department,
more and communicate more
when that's not actually
precisely.
what's going
And
on. It has
so we
nothing to do
both
with that specific
decided, my
person. It
debate
has to
partner
do
and
with
I,
that
to only
entire
write our debate
institution
briefs
that's
in
doing the thing,
EPrime,
that has done the
because we
thing,
wanted
that
to have
is
these really
excluding these
sensible,
people.
logical kind
So
of
rather than
debate
saying this
briefs that
person is the
didn't use
first trans
any
author to be on this
like
list,
manipulative
actually
rhetoric
putting
or
it in a more active
Aristotelian
voice,
fallacy. And
this
I also started deciding,
list, this
I
bestsellers
decided to
list,
just
has
communicate
never
completely in
included a
EPrime
transgender person until
for
now,
going on
or this
about 2
academic department has
years.
never had a woman in
And I
leadership until
really
now, or has
got a
never
lot out of
selected a
it.
woman for
It
leadership.
really encouraged me to write
Um,
more in
a
the
lot
active
of
voice.
firsts,
You have
once
to
we
use
flip
a
it on
lot
its
of
head like
verbs.
that,
If you
you
can't say
realize
to
it
be, you have
isn't
to
necessarily
actually
this
use a
personal
lot of
thing to
active.
celebrate,
It is
words to
a
describe
legacy
what
of
happened and
institutional
why and who did the action,
exclusion.
who's responsible for the
Um,
action,
and
instead
I
of
think,
talking
and you and
passively
I
about
have
this
talked about this
action.
before.
It also
It
can be
was
very
done.
useful for
Well, who
just
did it? You have to
highlighting
actually say that in
where
EPrime.
one's
And
experience of
I certainly don't
disability
stick to it
originates.
like
So it's not,
devotedly now,
I am
but
sensitive to bright
I don't write
lights.
or talk
It's bright
exclusively in it
lights
anymore.
cause
But
me
it really is such a
migraines,
useful
make it
framework, I
hard for me to
think, for
focus, and make it impossible for me to
outlining.
remain in this space. So one thing I think that can be helpful is to try and think about in terms of just the collective of people that are excluded by whatever thing causes an exclusion for you. So in the example that you just gave, if I walk into a meeting and the walls are really echoey, no one's using a microphone, so they're just yelling and their voice echoes off the walls. Um, I can't follow what people are saying. I could treat that as a weakness on my part and get very into my own head about whether I even deserve to derail the conversation by bringing that up. But then I can just remind myself, or even literally picture, just the ghosts of how many other people have come and left for that same reason, and really think about positioning that problem in that context. Like people with sensory processing disorders, deaf people, people with sensitive hearing, people who lip read, people who need speakers to use microphones. All these groups of people cannot come to this meeting. And that might be usually how I would present the problem to people in that organization, to really make them aware, um, this isn't just one person. You don't know how many people you've missed out on in this movement who had wonderful things to contribute, or had, just would have added to the body count, the number of people at the function, at the line, at the action, if only this environment didn't cause so much pain and confusion and made it impossible for people to communicate.